Ever finish a book and just need to talk about it? Welcome to Book Labs, the show that takes a deep dive into your favorite books, usually in 10 minutes or less. Whether it's a literary masterpiece, a guilty pleasure, or a hidden gem, we break it down, explore what makes it great, and maybe even change how you see it. So grab that first cup of coffee and let's get into it. Welcome to Book Labs.
Ever get that feeling? You know when you're like at a really fancy hotel, maybe you're on vacation or just passing through, and you can't help but notice like the little dramas unfolding around you.
Yeah.
The subtle power plays, the way people interact. It's almost theatrical.
Yeah.
It's kind of compelling in a weird way, right?
Yeah.
And that's exactly the territory we're going to be diving into today.
It is. It's that heightened, often artificial environment of luxury, you know, that creates this fascinating pressure cooker for human behavior. You strip away those everyday routines, concentrate people in these gilded cages, and suddenly their underlying anxieties and desires, they really bubble to the surface. It's a perfect setup for observation and some very sharp social commentary.
And that brings us to our topic for today, the HBO series, The White Lotus. We've heard from so many of you who are interested in kind of unpacking some of the deeper social critiques that are woven into this, well, incredibly popular show.
Yeah, it's a huge hit.
So we've gathered our thoughts on its core ideas, the threads that kind of run through all the seasons, some of the characters that just stick with you.
Oh, yeah.
Its distinctive storytelling style, and of course all the details from the recent and much discussed third season, which was set in Thailand.
Yes, and it's worth pointing out right from the start, The White Lotus isn't adapted from a book, which is actually quite rare for these kinds of prestige dramas.
Right.
This is the singular vision of Mike White, drawing from his own experiences and observations within the world of luxury and privilege. Think of us as offering you a shortcut to appreciating the show's layers, even if you haven't had the chance to see every single episode.
Okay, so let's unpack the central idea here. The basic structure of The White Lotus is actually quite brilliant in its simplicity. Each season basically takes us to a different, incredibly opulent White Lotus resort.
Exactly. We're introduced to a new set of guests. And while there might be, a familiar face or two amongst the staff across seasons, for the most part, it's a fresh ensemble in each location. But that underlying sense of tension, that feeling that things are just slightly off and could erupt at any moment, that's a constant. We started in Hawaii for season 1, then moved to the breathtaking scenery of Sicily for season 2, and most recently, season 3 unfolded against the backdrop of Thailand.
And that anthology format is so effective. It allows the show to delve into very similar themes, wealth, power, relationships, but through completely different cultural prisms.
Yes.
And with, entirely new sets of personalities kind of bumping up against each other.
Absolutely. Yeah. It really does keep the show feeling vital. While those core themes persist, the change of location, it's not just cosmetic, it deeply informs the social commentary, the cultural context of each resort setting, the local customs, the historical dynamics. They all play a significant role in shaping the interactions and those underlying critiques.
Speaking of those critiques, let's really dig into them. Because at its core, The White Lotus is doing more than just showing us beautiful scenery and rich people behaving badly.
Oh, absolutely.
It's got a pretty sharp edge when it comes to its observations about wealth and privilege.
Absolutely. The show really holds a mirror up to the ultra-wealthy, and what we often see reflected is a deep insecurity masked by extravagance, a constant need for validation that their wealth ironically prevents them from truly achieving. Think about how often these characters try to prove their goodness or their relevance precisely because their wealth creates a disconnect from genuine human experience. We saw this so clearly with the Mossbacher family in season 1.
Oh, yeah.
Trying so hard to appear progressive, but still operating within a system that fundamentally benefits their immense wealth.
And Tanya, across both seasons, is such a fascinating case study in this. Her wealth isolates her, no question.
Yeah.
But it also seems to create this almost impenetrable bubble where she's completely unaware of how her money and status impact her interactions, and often the very real dangers she kind of stumbles into culminating in that incredibly dark ending in Sicily.
Precisely. And it's not just about the guests either. The show brilliantly illuminates the power dynamics between the staff and the guests. That inherent imbalance, the way the staff are expected to anticipate and cater to every single whim, often at a real cost to their own dignity and well-being. The conflict between Armand, the resort manager, and Shane in season 1 is such a powerful illustration of that.
Oh, for sure.
Shane's unwavering sense of entitlement clashing with Armand's growing resentment and eventual unraveling, it was riveting.
It gets even more layered when you consider the gender and sexual politics the show explores. Like the really compelling and at times deeply uncomfortable dynamic between Harper and Daphne in season 2.
Oh, interesting dynamic there.
Their completely contrasting approaches to their marriage, their subtle, almost subconscious power plays
Yes.
were so captivating to watch unfold.
What's fascinating here is how the show layers these very personal dynamics onto a much broader commentary about colonialism and exploitation. Think about it, these wealthy Westerners are choosing to vacation in places like Hawaii and Sicily, which have complex histories often involving economic dependence or past exploitation.
Right.
The very presence of these ultra-luxury resorts can be seen as a modern manifestation of this, where the local economy and culture can sometimes be at the service of these wealthy visitors. The show subtly asks us to consider who truly benefits from this exchange.
It's like the show is encouraging us to think about the often unseen labor and the potential for cultural appropriation that can exist just beneath the surface of these seemingly idyllic vacation experiences.
Exactly. And what makes these points resonate so strongly is that the characters, for all their flaws, they feel incredibly real. They're not just one-dimensional villains of wealth. They're often deeply human, albeit deeply dysfunctional, grappling with their own insecurities and desires.
Let's delve into some of those characters, because I know everyone who's watched the show has such strong reactions to them,
They do.
whether they love them or love to hate them. Take Shane in season 1. It's so easy to just dismiss him as like a spoiled brat, but I found myself wondering at times if there was more to his behavior than just entitlement. Could he also be seen as a product of certain societal expectations, maybe even a victim in some way of his own narrow worldview?
That's a really interesting angle to consider. On the surface, Shane absolutely embodies that entitled, privileged male archetype. But if you dig a little deeper, you do start to see glimpses of his underlying insecurities, his almost childlike dependence on his mother's approval, and a real inability to connect with his wife on an emotional level beyond a transactional, almost possessive dynamic. He's certainly a product of his upbringing and his environment, but the show doesn't necessarily excuse his actions.
Right.
Instead, it invites us to really examine the complexities and limitations that can come hand in hand with that kind of privilege.
And Tanya,
Yeah.
oh, she's such a magnetic presence, even in her most outlandish moments.
Yeah, you can't take your eyes off her.
Was she purely a tragic figure, ultimately undone by her own deep vulnerabilities? Or was there also a layer of dark humor to her journey? I mean, you couldn't help but laugh sometimes, even as things were spiraling.
It's definitely a potent cocktail of tragedy and dark comedy with Tanya. There's a profound loneliness at her core, a desperate yearning for genuine connection and belonging that, sadly, often leads her into exploitative and ultimately dangerous situations.
Yeah.
But at the same time, her complete lack of self-awareness, her often absurd reactions, and her almost comical inability to truly see and understand the people around her, they definitely provide moments of very dark comedic relief. She's a character that elicits both empathy and a kind of horrified amusement.
What about a relationship like Harper and Ethan in season 2? They seem like the most normal couple initially, but their time at the White Lotus in Sicily really exposed some cracks.
Oh, definitely.
What insights did their struggles offer about modern marriage, the subtle pressures and anxieties that can erode trust and intimacy?
Well, what's so compelling about Harper and Ethan is exactly that initial sense of normalcy.
Right.
You know, they represent a kind of groundedness that the other couples lack.
Yeah.
But that intensely sensual and somewhat unhinged atmosphere of the resort, combined with their own underlying insecurities about fidelity and what constitutes a fulfilling relationship, it really acts as a catalyst. It highlights how external factors and perceived threats can quickly amplify existing vulnerabilities within a partnership, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and each other.
We also saw some pretty dramatic character arcs and downfalls, didn't we? Armin's descent in season 1, fueled by that escalating conflict with Shane, was just devastating to watch. And Portia's naivety in season 2, getting drawn into something so far beyond her comprehension, served as a really stark reminder of the potential dangers of being out of your depth and perhaps a little starstruck by wealth and power.
Absolutely. These characters often serve as cautionary figures, illustrating the destructive potential of unchecked privilege, deep-seated insecurity, and just plain poor judgment, all magnified by that isolating and pressure cooker environment of the resort.
And that leads us to the way the show is actually put together. Because the narrative and stylistic elements of The White Lotus are just as crucial to its impact as the characters and the themes.
Oh, for sure.
When you say there's a real artistry to how the story unfolds.
Indeed. Take the use of those opening death teases, for instance. We begin each season knowing that someone is going to die,
Right.
which immediately casts this shadow of dread and suspense over everything that follows.
Yes.
You know, it completely colors how we interpret every interaction, every seemingly insignificant conflict, because we're constantly looking for clues, trying to anticipate who the victim might be and the chain of events that could lead to their demise.
It's like we're all amateur detectives from the very first scene.
We are.
And the resort setting itself, as we've touched on, feels almost like a character in its own right.
Exactly. It's this self-contained, almost artificial ecosystem where the usual social rules seem slightly distorted. The sheer opulence, juxtaposed with that forced proximity of strangers, can really amplify those underlying tensions and dysfunctions. It's a beautiful, even seductive cage in a way.
And you absolutely cannot talk about The White Lotus without mentioning that incredibly haunting theme song. It instantly establishes this unsettling, almost dreamlike atmosphere.
That music is so incredibly effective, it manages to be both alluring and deeply unsettling at the same time, perfectly encapsulating the show's unique blend of surface beauty and underlying darkness.
All right, let's shift gears to the most recent season, season 3, which takes place in Thailand. It sounded like it really built upon some of the show's established elements, while also venturing into some new and potentially even darker territory.
It did. Moving the setting to a luxury wellness resort in Thailand allowed the show to delve into fascinating themes around spirituality, the weight of generational trauma, the complexities of toxic masculinity, and the often problematic commodification of wellness practices. All while keeping those signature critiques of wealth and privilege very much at the forefront. And with its extended run of 8 episodes, it was the longest season so far.
Oh, wow.
Which promised an even more intricate and dramatically dense unfolding of events, culminating in a finale that was widely described as both violent and full of unexpected twists.
And it certainly delivered on those twists.
Yeah.
So let's dive into some of the key plot developments and finale revelations.
Okay.
The body count was definitely a major talking point this season.
It was, wasn't it?
Wasn't it?
Yes. We saw the very dramatic deaths of Rick, played by Walton Goggins, and Chelsea, brought to life by Amy Lou Wood in a pretty intense shootout. But the real shocker, the one that really got people talking, was the reveal that the man Rick killed, Jim Hollinger, played by Scott Glenn, was actually his estranged father. A truly brutal and unexpected twist of fate.
It's the kind of narrative punch The White Lotus delivers so effectively.
It is.
And it wasn't just about who died, was it? There was also that near miss with Timothy Ratliff and those, shall we say, enhanced pina coladas.
Oh, yes. Jason Isaacs' character, Timothy, almost inadvertently poisoned his family with those concoctions. Thankfully, he intervened just in the nick of time, although his son Lachlan did ingest some of it, but thankfully survived.
Yeah.
It was a stark reminder of how quickly things can take a dangerous turn, even in what's supposed to be paradise.
And after everything Belinda went through in season 1, it sounds like she finally managed to carve out some form of justice for herself, albeit through somewhat unconventional means.
What's particularly interesting about Belinda's arc is how she leveraged her knowledge of the events surrounding Tanya's death in Sicily to her advantage. She managed to negotiate a significant settlement, $5 million, from Greg Hunt, Tanya's widower, in exchange for her silence. It's a morally ambiguous but ultimately somewhat satisfying resolution for a character who was so clearly wronged.
It sounds like the Ratliff family had a particularly turbulent stay at the White Lotus in Thailand.
They did. Parker Posey's portrayal of Victoria seemed to be a real comedic highlight amidst all the darkness.
Yeah.
However, Timothy's storyline involving his financial troubles and his daughter Piper's brief flirtation with a more spiritual path Both seem to kind of meander and ultimately resolved in a return to more familiar patterns of family dysfunction.
Right. And what about the girls' trip trio from season 2? It sounds like their reunion in Thailand was as chaotic as ever.
Yes, after those inevitable clashes and confrontations, Tanya's old companions, played by Jennifer Coolidge, Connie Britton, and Alexandra Daddario, did manage to find some semblance of reconciliation. However, they collectively turned their backs on Valentin, played by Arnas Fedorovicius, with strong implications that he was involved in a jewelry heist. So even amidst attempts at peace, there's still that undercurrent of drama.
And in a bit of an unexpected turn, it seems like one of the resort staff members actually had a pretty significant development.
That's right. The security guard, Gaitok, played by Tammy Sapthamthong, who was responsible for shooting Rick, actually received a promotion for his actions.
Wow.
And in a more heartwarming development, he also managed to rekindle his relationship with Mook, played by Lisa from Blackpink. So a bit of an upward trajectory there amidst all the surrounding chaos.
Now, I have to ask about this rather controversial incest subplot involving Lachlan and his brother Saxon.
Oh, right.
That sounds like it generated some pretty strong and divided reactions among viewers.
It did. The implied attraction and intimate moments between the brothers, played by Lachlan and Patrick Schwarzenegger, definitely sparked a lot of debate. Some viewers interpreted it as a provocative exploration of taboo desires and complex familial relationships, while others felt it was gratuitous and potentially exploitative. It definitely proved to be a significant point of contention.
It also sounds like the pacing of this season was a point of discussion for many viewers.
Yes, there were definitely criticisms leveled against the season, with some finding it too slow or too grim in its overall tone, perhaps missing some of those sharper comedic elements that balanced the drama in previous seasons. However, creator Mike White has been quite vocal in defending this slow burn approach, explaining that he intentionally used the pacing to build suspense and create a sense of unease for the audience.
And despite some of those criticisms, it seems like this season did have some notable connections back to earlier storylines.
It did. We saw Greg Hunt still potentially facing consequences for his involvement in Tanya's death, last seen with Chloe, the woman he encountered in Sicily. So those narrative threads continue to weave their way through the show's universe.
Right.
And Megan Fahey, who gave such a memorable performance as Daphne in season 2, even hinted at the possibility of a crossover with characters from the Patton couple in season 1 in a potential 4th season.
Interesting.
Which is a tantalizing prospect.
So what was the general critical consensus on season 3?
It seemed to be a bit of a mixed bag overall. Carrie Coon's performance, Parker Posey's comedic turns, and that stunning Thailand setting were all consistently praised.
Yeah.
However, as we touched on, some critics found the pacing too slow or the overall tone too dark.
Right.
Despite these mixed reviews, the season finale still managed to achieve record-breaking viewership for the series, drawing in a massive 6.2 million viewers.
Yeah.
So even with some dissenting voices, it clearly resonated with a significant portion of the audience.
And what hints, if any, have been dropped about what we might expect in a potential season 4?
Well, Mike White has mentioned that he's considering moving away from the coastal resort settings that have been the show's hallmark so far.
Okay.
But he has definitely promised that there will be more murders, so that element of dark suspense will likely remain. As for potential locations, there's been speculation about Japan, the Alps, and even a cruise ship as possibilities, although nothing has been officially confirmed at this stage.
It's still quite remarkable to remember that all of this intricate storytelling, these memorable and often deeply flawed characters, all spring from the mind of Mike White. The White Lotus really isn't based on any pre-existing book or other source material, is it?
That's absolutely correct. Unlike so many successful television series that draw their inspiration from literary works, The White Lotus is entirely Mike White's original creation.
Right.
He's drawn inspiration from his own life experiences, particularly his stays at luxury resorts, including in Hawaii, where he owns property.
Oh.
His extensive background in Hollywood has also undoubtedly shaped his satirical and often pointed portrayal of the privileged and sometimes very out-of-touch individuals we see on screen.
Okay, so as we bring this deep dive into The White Lotus to a close, what would you say are the key takeaways for our listeners?
Ultimately, The White Lotus is a fascinating example of dark comedy and incisive social satire. It cleverly uses that alluring and escapist backdrop of luxury resorts to dissect complex and often uncomfortable themes around wealth, privilege, power dynamics, and the many ways in which human beings can be deeply dysfunctional.
Right.
Through its vividly drawn characters and suspenseful narratives, it offers a sharp critique of contemporary society without ever feeling didactic or preachy. It's a show that manages to be both highly entertaining and deeply thought-provoking, often prompting a simultaneous laugh and a cringe.
And for you, our listener, hopefully this exploration has provided you with a richer understanding of the show's underlying depth and its cultural relevance. Whether you've been a devoted fan from the beginning or you've simply been curious about why it's generated so much buzz, it really offers a very insightful, albeit often unsettling, look at human behavior when it's placed in these rather extreme environments of, well, extreme wealth and leisure.
Absolutely. And that raises a final question for you to consider. In a world that seems increasingly fixated on the pursuit of luxury, wellness, and status, what are some of the often overlooked costs and perhaps even the inherent contradictions that might mirror some of the uncomfortable truths that the White Lotus so skillfully brings to the surface? It's worth reflecting on those dynamics in your own observations of the world around you.
Food for thought. Thank you.
Welcome.
And thank you all for listening.
Thanks, everyone.
And that's a wrap on this week's Deep Dive. Got a book you love and want us to explore? Let us know. Your book could be next. Don't forget to subscribe and smash the like if you enjoy the show, and share with your fellow book lovers. Until next time, keep reading, keep thinking, and we'll see you in the next chapter.